Today, I'm joined by Alvin Kressler, CEO and Executive Director at the CMT Association. Alvin, thank you so much for joining us on the Association Marketing Show.
Thanks, Abe. Great to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. So I always like to start with asking our guests about their personal and professional background and how they entered the wonderful world of associations, I like to call it, and what your role today is.
So, for me, my career started a while ago. I was actually right out of college in the military for a few years, and then came back, did graduate work, and went into financial services. And I kind of found my way into the association world first as a member of Professional Association for Analysts and Portfolio Managers, CFA Institute. And I worked, a number of years in industry as an analyst and in various roles, and then managing teams. And kind of in the early 2000s, I was actually at one of the big financial service firms, and kind of looking around, and got reached out to by a board member who was on the board of CFA New York at the time. It had a different name. Gotcha. And they were looking for a new executive director, CEO. And I was a member, but he said, look, you've been running this other small group here, and we really need to kind of do some changes here. And we want to have somebody who's not just a member or, has a background in financial services, but actually has run organization. And so I joined them, and then we're there for about 4 years and went back into industry. And, as circumstance happened, a friend of mine called me up and said, hey, this other group you've been a member of is looking for a new executive director and CEO. Mm-hmm. Would you consider moving back into the association world and kind of, running that organization? And interestingly enough, it was a smaller organization than CFA New York in terms of just overall budget, but it had a bigger mandate. We're a global organization in terms of credentialing. So the CMT Association, Chartered Market Technicians Association, we actually run a credential for analysts and portfolio managers and traders around technical analysis, using technical analysis in their investment process. That's now about 4.5 years ago that happened, that I came back into the association world. In the business world, it's fairly clear that your motive is to generate profit, right? And generate income and
straightforward,
profit.
Right.
And you try and figure out goods and services that the market wants, and you drive those into the marketplace. In the association world, sometimes it gets flipped on its head. You kind of have to, you go from the standpoint of sometimes you still want to generate a positive income because that keeps the organization going forward, because if you just continually use the balance sheet, at some point you don't have a balance sheet left.
Right.
But there are times when the profit motive or the profit driver is secondary or third on the list of what you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. But you still, as the person running the organization, have to keep an eye on how much of that you're doing and eating into. I guess in some regards, I came into the association world a little differently in that I spent a fair amount of time in the for-profit sector, but I don't think that's so much unique anymore. Maybe 10 years ago that was unique.
Yeah.
Today, I think that you see that more and more. And I would say in many instances, it's more challenging running an association than running a for-profit business because of the non-profit driven motives for delivering a service.
Right. It's a more complicated formula that you have to try to manage on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. Could you briefly describe CMT Association? You did as part of the intro, but like the main lineup of goods and services that you provide to your members and kind of the history of the organization?
So I like to say we're a 50-year-old startup, in that it's only been in the last 10 years or so the organization has really kind of looked at itself as a business. It had been more about a membership and an association up until that time. Now, our two main areas of kind of product and services, obviously a traditional membership association.
Right.
And our members are financial professionals. It's not an association for individuals who are just interested in technical analysis, although we do provide some of our programming gears to that so that there's a knowledge base that gets out into the public, that the skills aren't kind of misunderstood or misused, because it can be dangerous. It's somebody says, if you just show somebody, give them a book, it's kind of like laying a loaded gun. If there's no context around it.
Totally.
So the organization really started as a membership association and then developed and said, we really should put a framework around what defines a professional technical analyst. And so they developed, years ago, started to develop the body of knowledge in the curriculum. And that's where we do it. And so our business is kind of almost evenly divided at the moment, a little heavier to the credentialing side in terms of just how that business develops.
Yeah.
And then from that, it's a 3-part exam. It takes about 18 months if you go fully through it. We give all 3 levels of the exam 3 times a year.
Okay.
So if you're successful and you pass all 3 levels, then you would apply to become a full member and use the charter. You have to be a full member to use the charter, so you have to be a member in good standing. It's part of, in some regards, I hate to say policing, but it's about making sure that the individuals who say they are charter holders are maintaining their continuing ed. We don't have an explicit number of hours, but every year our members sign an annual disclosure statement that says that they're maintaining proficiency, because our skill set can be applied in so many different parts of the market. It's hard to say you need 10 hours here and 10 hours there, because in some people, they actually need 2 hours in category A, and they really need 18 hours in category B, because that's how their market and where they play is developing.
Right.
So that's really what we do. And obviously there's other pieces around what we call membership value. That is really continuing ed programming for our members. And we make that available to the public at large in many instances, so that it's not just contained, so that anybody can come in and listen in and utilize that knowledge and hear from those experts.
Gotcha.
But again, those are the 2 primary. Perfect. We're a very small staff with a global mandate. I have 8 full-time employees, including myself globally. There are probably another 5 on and off part-time employees. Okay. And then there are 100 to 150 volunteers who consistently work with us, helping us put on chapter events around the globe. And so, we do leverage, that. And then we leverage a lot of vendor relations, whether it's on the technology front or on the marketing front and deliverables of marketing, using platforms rather than developing everything in-house.
That can be a superpower if that's done well, or it can be kind of an unmitigated disaster if it's not done well, in terms of kind of outsourcing key components of your organization's work to vendors, right? So it seems like that you have found a way to do that pretty successfully, that you have, at least a handful, if not a large amount, of really successful vendor relationships. I know we've been working together for a little while, Feathr and CMT Association, but I know that you work with many other vendors. What advice would you give to other association leaders or association executives in terms of creating vendor relationships that are actually successful and fruitful long-term, as opposed to being like expensive experiments or wastes of time, which I've also seen?
Yeah, I think the key is having a really open and transparent dialogue with the vendor, letting them know what you're trying to gain from the relationship and how they can gain from the relationship. And obviously the relationship for them is in many instances, you're a customer and you're a part of their revenue stream. But if they have a really good understanding of what you're trying to gain, it also helps them focus their service. If they have 6 products, but the reality is you really only you're only going to be able to capture use and utilize 2 of those products, having a very clear relationship and transparency with that vendor about, hey, look, I know we could have access to all 6 of your products with the way our relationship is structured, but the reality is we need to focus on these 2. And the other thing that I think also helps is with all of our vendors, we have really regular check-ins. A couple of our vendors that, are our very key vendors in delivering the test and the curriculum. Those vendors are at different times of the year, weekly check-ins, if not bi-weekly check-ins. And, in the slow periods of the year, their bi-monthly check-ins. So,
Yeah.
it's never, we don't allow that relationship to ever go 30 or 45 days without a touch point.
Yeah.
Where, and I think the part of that is I think about them as just an extension of our employees,
Yeah.
right? The product manager or the project manager that we have with each of those vendors, I think of them as part of our employee group. They're working for us. They're our direct interface into the vendor relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really want to have that. And so what's really great about, doing in the high intensity periods when we're doing weekly or bi-weekly check-ins, the consistent people on the call are, the team from CMT Association who's working on that,
Mm-hmm.
and the product manager at the vendor.
Mm-hmm.
But the product manager at the vendor is bringing in different experts for each of those meetings
according to
help
what's
us
appropriate,
navigate
right?
delivery.
That's perfect.
So
I love that.
anytime a relationship is broken down, you can almost always track it down to, at some point you stop the check-ins, or the check-ins slowed to where they weren't frequent enough
Yeah.
that both parties knew or understood what was being worked on or what was needed.
Right.
The Association Marketing Show is sponsored by Feathr, the digital marketing toolkit for events and associations. Is your organization looking to ramp up its sponsorship strategy in 2021? Our latest ebook takes a close look at all of the ways you can leverage digital sponsorships to make up for lost revenue or create new revenue streams altogether. Get your free copy of How to Generate Digital Sponsorship Revenue in 2021 and more at feathr.co/resources. That's feathr.co/resources.
It's so funny that you're using that language. We talk internally like that. So we have our customer success team, which is kind of like our account management team, to use a more traditional term. And those are the people that are in touch with their group of customers at least once a month. And especially around like slow maintenance periods, that's when it's like that. But we're flexible too. And a lot of our customers either ask for this on their own, or we will recommend it. Like, for example, somebody's using, Feathr's marketing tools to promote an annual meeting, whether it's virtual or in person, depending on the timing. And like in the last 6 weeks to the point of that event taking place, we'll change our meeting schedule from monthly to something more regular, because that's when a lot of the work is happening, and that's where really real-time communication is super important. And I like the other thing that you mentioned is that communication allows each party to update each other on what's happening and what's important and what has changed in importance, right? Because it's not you sign a vendor agreement or a relationship agreement, at a certain point, and then for your entire relationship, the priorities that you talked about on day one are going to be the same, and the plan of execution is going to be the same. It's going to evolve, especially now, pandemic life. Things are evolving all the time. So that regular communication is so important, because things might be out the window that were really important, 3 months ago when the relationship got started.
Well, and I also find that as you start to use somebody's services, we were just talking about this with the marketing team the other day. It might be, you look at a couple different things and different ways of getting your message out. But at the end of the day, as I said to the head of marketing, the category you're talking about is paid advertising, paid placement. And whether it's wherever it is, it's paid placement. And we might be finding that for whatever reason, the behavior of the potential marketplace or the client is changed to where they're coming through this one channel that has traditionally not been a strong channel for us. We've never, we've not gained a lot of advantage from there, but all of a sudden we're saying, conversion rates that are 4 times conversion rates on any other channel.
Yeah.
And I said, my head of marketing and I were having this conversation just yesterday. And I said to her, just turn the dial up over there, turn something else down. I said, you've got your bucket of dollars that you're planning to spend. And we're looking at this, and we're looking at the data coming in, and we're saying, whatever we did, and we're going to need to go back and study it, but for right now, we don't need to study. We can look at the data coming in and saying, channel C was supposed to be, we normally get, just for numbers, we usually get a 5% conversion rate out of that channel. Right now we're getting 15%. And that's our lowest spend. And this other channel where we normally get 15, we're barely getting 5. Well, something went on with our messaging in those channels. Let's turn down A.
Right.
turn it down and turn up C, and let's throw some additional dollars into C right now, reduce what we're spending in A. Let's then step back over the next couple of weeks, take a look at what we put out in those channels, what the message was, and what the feedback is off the conversion rate. I said to her, we don't need to do, a deep study dive in, advance. We can see the results coming in. It's been steady for 2 weeks.
Right. That's
Just
enough
turn
of a
up
signal.
C.
Yeah.
And we'll go back and study it and figure out what happened.
Right.
And on that post-mortem, we can kind of look at it and say, okay, maybe we can figure out what happened and maybe we can't. And it might have just been,
Yeah.
we've seen, and you've probably seen it too, through the last 9 months or so of the COVID and people moving into a more virtual environment, behavior has changed.
Totally.
And so you have to be willing to be nimble and say, I'm looking at real-time data coming in. I now have 2 weeks of that real-time data. And what I expected to happen didn't happen. How can I react to that?
Yes.
And take advantage of it?
What you're saying is like music to my ears for a few reasons. One of the main things that I'm appreciating is how close it seems like you are to your marketing lead and to the marketing of your organization. This is a question that I was thinking about actually, that I'm excited to ask you as an ED for your association is, how do you view marketing and communications, and how do you view that kind of like strategically for your organization, and how close do you stay to it, and how do you prioritize that, and what does your relationship with your head of marketing look like?
When I came on board, the marketing dollars that we were spending were way under where we should have been. And it's just a legacy of the business having been run more as a club and making the transition to thinking about it as a business.
Yeah.
And two, understanding the dynamic of brand building versus asking for a sell versus selling, right? You kind of think about your marketing effort. If you just think about it broadly, I'm trying to do two things, right? At the end of the day, with my marketing and messaging, I'm trying to build awareness and knowledge of my brand and my product.
Yep.
And then the other piece that you're trying to do, which is much closer to the customer in the end of the day, when you think about it, is I'm trying to get them to take an action.
Right.
I'm trying to sell something. And so the marketing has to, we have these conversations internally all the time. When do we want to do the brand building versus the selling kind of message? What are the channel differences for doing that? We have a weekly call. The marketing team runs it. I sit in on it. But as I'm very clear with them, it's your call. I'm just the participant from the standpoint of I might ask questions. And with the business development team, the team that's on the ground trying to do stuff either with sponsors or positioning product. And again, we're a small team, so sometimes that involves, volunteers and or vendors as part of the call, or it might be separate calls with them.
Yeah.
But we do that weekly. And then, my marketing head and the team that works with her on the website and other development stuff around the website, because I kind of moved the website from being considered technology to being part of the marketing.
Yep. Smart.
It's yours. You own the website as part of the marketing team. It's
right.
it's one of your tools. Whereas I think historically the website was kind of thought of as a technology spend. And so we get that team together, and you look at it in discrete pieces, but then how does it fit into the whole piece? And so then the marketing team and I will probably meet formally once a month. But like I said, we're doing weekly calls anyways, but I get with them as a side conversation with just me and them once a month, just to kind of think about long-term overarching types of things. Whereas that weekly meeting is much more about tactics.
Tactical, right.
The monthly call that I do with them and the meeting with them, and we'll bring in one of our outside consultants who does a lot of the website stuff so that he's on board and understands what we're doing, because the website plays into that.
Yeah.
We'll do that longer arc conversation, that, hey, we know we have some launch dates coming up over the 6, 12, 18 months. What do we want to do about our planning for that? What do we want to change? What do we want to look at?
Right.
And all of that type of stuff. So we do that as well. But again, you, I always feel like it's just important, even I'm the head of the organization, but I've got to, I don't want to know all the details about how the sausage is made per se down into the nitty gritty of
Right.
individual spends on the channel. But what I want to look at is that on a big picture is have them bring it up to me and say, overall, this is what the picture looks like. And then, we can ask questions about how we want to change things. And then are we thinking about a new service? Or in the case of something, we've talked about with your team,
Yeah.
is changing patterns of consumer behavior generationally.
Right.
So I'm in the generation and probably the middle to end of that generation that joining affinity groups or membership associations is part of what you did. I look at my kids and they are much more subscription-based consumption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And will they be a member of an organization? Yeah, but they're more likely to consume and feel comfortable consuming that membership on whether it's a weekly charge or a monthly charge of a subscription.
Yeah.
And I think long term that's going to change how we think about associations in terms of the value proposition we bring, and what our members are looking for from us.
Yeah. This is
Some of it might be the same. It's just a difference in how you consume.
Totally. Yes, this is such an interesting point, and I was so interested to bring it up with you here today based upon our last conversation when we were talking about bringing you on here is the evolution of the membership model itself, right? Yep. I think maintaining the quality and the compellingness and the accuracy of the underlying kind of content assets or experience assets that you provide to your members, that's clearly important, right? And nobody is questioning that. But also there's the method of delivery of those member services and products, right? Which a lot of them have typically been wrapped up in a yearly membership, right? That's
exactly.
That's probably the legacy model that is most prevalent in the association world. And I even relate with that myself. I'm 31. I remember when I was in college at UF, some association chapter representatives came and talked to my class once or twice. I was in the advertising program. I kind of like vaguely remember hearing about some chapters of some associations related to what I was studying, but it was not like, oh yeah, like that's part of the rite of passage of becoming a professional advertiser or marketer, which is what I was on the track for, was to become part of these one or two or three associations. Like that was critical. And so I can relate with that point too. And a lot of my kind of professional education, so to speak, I get in little pockets from different individuals, organizations, brands, some formal things, but it's kind of all over the place. And so because of that, I'm reticent to give $300, $400, $500 or more per year to one organization. I would rather use that in bite-sized manners throughout the year to get that piece of info or that course or that webinar or what have you from different people that, according to what I see that I want to learn more about or what I need. And so I think that's super interesting. It's not only like keep up the quality of your ongoing education of your member experiences and member resources, but what is the method that you are delivering them through? That also requires innovation, not just innovation on the underlying content.
I actually think what's starting to shift is, one, it's been forced upon us, right? Because of COVID and going virtual. The local chapters don't necessarily always have the budget or the strength to do something in a virtual world. They weren't set up that way, right? They don't have a whole website. They don't have, they were part of a parent organization's website, or they were, or they operated through the parent to do that portion of it, but the live programming was done locally.
Right.
I think that if you think about it, the NPR, are we shifting to where 80% of the programming is going to happen from the bigger organization and get pushed out? And maybe the local delivers it, or is part of the delivery mechanism, but it's only 15 to 20% is delivered at the local level, and that bigger piece is delivered, and it is delivered through a virtual or a combination of a hybrid model where part of it is virtual and part of it is a live in-person experience. I don't think the live in-person experience is going away, and the strength traditionally of the big association model was that for young people coming into the business world, it was an opportunity to meet people outside of your own firm who were in your field, who you might develop a mentor-mentee relationship with, who is outside your firm. And so you still want to be able to provide that, but that platform you're providing it on is going to be very different over the next 5 to 10 years than it has traditionally been. And we're already starting to see that change.
Yeah.
The big change is going to be on the model, as you say. Am I willing to give $300, $400 in membership? Yeah. And is my firm willing to reimburse me for it?
Right.
And if I now have to have 3 or 4 or 5 memberships because, in the financial services world, there are, designations, 15 different designations. And depending on what field or part of the field you're in, 3 or 4 may be applicable.
Right.
Well, if you think about it under the traditional membership model, 3 of those memberships, you're talking about $1,000 to $1,200 a year.
Right.
Just in membership fees.
Right.
And how much of the continuing ed is embedded in that fee versus do I have to pay extra for it anyway?
Yeah.
We've followed the model that if you're a member, very little of it do you pay extra for. Usually it's only the big conference, right? The annual conference is an extra charge, and all of the other activities you do are part of your membership fee.
Right.
But others don't do that model. And so I think when I start to look at it in our planning and my roadmap in terms of thinking about the next 18 months, 3 years, 5 years, and 7 years, how do we have to shift our technology? Because that's the engagement, right? That's the primary method of my engagement with my members around the globe. Although I do have chapters, and we do some engagement at that chapter level. How do we can we replicate in some measure that in-person networking experience in a virtual environment?
Yeah.
And make it valuable to the member. And beyond just ultimately we have to deliver good content that helps you develop your skills. But that's only a part of it.
Right.
The other reason you're in the association is to meet people who can help you in your career.
Right.
Whether directly or indirectly, right? It's like, hey, I've got a job and you'd be perfect for it. Or, hey, can I talk to you about understanding, this dynamic I'm seeing in my business?
Right. Have you experienced this before? Right. Yeah. This is new territory for me. What can you share with me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that consuming it on the piece basis or on the subscription basis as you do it is going to become a bigger part of it. Just when you look at generationally, because for better or worse, the phones that we have and the apps have delivered that, that demand of I can have an app on there and maybe I pay $4 for the app and I have it, but then I can buy additional services through the app as I need them.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see how things develop, and I'm sure there'll be multiple emerging models as multiple models exist today, but share some similarities. I'm sure that'll be the case. One of the things that I think about sometimes as kind of an example for this is to some degree where like publishing has gone. In that publishing has become, for example, if you think about, I'm thinking like the Harvard Business Review, for example, right? It's like their model is really typically high quality content written by subject matter experts, right? There's like true expertise behind the content that's published. Again, I don't know all of what they publish, but some of the things that I've seen. Right. And as a non-member, I get access to a certain limited amount per month, right? Or per week. And then if I want additional content, then I can subscribe for a 30-day period or a 60-day period or a 90-day period and get unlimited access to a certain category of content.
Right. And
then maybe there's additional content that's still only available to me as a paying member, but for an additional charge, whether that's a virtual roundtable with an author of a piece, with a subject matter expert, for example, or something regional or something that's more networking and professional development focused, but still just with kind of paying members. I think that's an interesting kind of corollary, and I wonder if some of those dynamics will also develop in an association space, because one of the assets that professional associations have is true subject matter expertise.
Oh, yeah.
And to expose the right amount of that to attract people in the profession and to also kind of protect other components of that behind the membership to make that enticing. that's always a bit of a push-pull, but I think that it has to move more in the direction of exposure and then giving people more opportunities for deeper engagement with behind paying.
Yeah. I'm sorry, extra phone in the back there.
No worries.
We actually have a similar type of thing. We do have a publication we put out once a year, our Journal of Technical Analysis. And a similar idea is really geared with deep experts. The articles tend to be very technical, and not, kind of a play on word technical analysis, but very technical, right. Very specific to the industry, very specific to truly knowledgeable individuals, somebody who understands the skill set of what you're doing and what you're conveying.
Right.
And how much of that do you expose to the public? And can you start to take some of that into more bite-sized pieces that you can put into something that then the broader world can consume?
Yeah.
Meaning, can you take that plus a presentation like this, parts of this, and put together, 7 to 10 hours of content that somebody could consume over, online, read the articles, watch the presentation by the subject matter expert, and at the end of that 7 to 10 hours have developed some little bit of a skill, right? Yeah. Have developed something that is helpful for them. And then how do you price that and make it consumable? For our members today, it's all free. It's part of your membership.
Right.
But to those people who aren't part of the membership but would like to consume it, what's the right price point? What's the right delivery mechanism? How do you package it? How do you put it into something that makes it consumable?
Yeah.
For a broader community than you currently serve with the folks who clearly are your members today.
Yeah.
And then do that. So it is a battle that's just really starting to fully be engaged in the association world, I think.
Right.
I think the publishing is a great example. You look at textbooks. You can still get, here, let me grab it here. This is our 2020, the 2021.
For everybody listening, Alvin just grabbed a big textbook and showed it to the camera.
So this is now this book you can purchase it. You can get a digital, basically the digital version of that book, like on a Kindle. You can get it through the publisher. But now we've just introduced it in a learning platform where it's broken up into what you would call lessons.
Right. So
that delivery mechanism is entirely different, and the way that's structured is entirely different than just reading the book. It's all the same material.
Right, but it appeals to a different type of learner as well.
Right.
Alvin, last question before we let you get out of here, if that's okay, is a question that I ask to almost every guest, which is, at this stage in your career, what do you wish you would have known when you got started? And you could think about that, your entire professional background, or maybe even just getting started in association leadership. Kind of take that any way that you'd like.
Yeah, I think that the piece that I think that you kind of don't know when you first get into it, that you kind of would have been helpful to know coming into it, especially coming from, let's call it the industry and for-profit world into the association world, is while there's a lot of similarities of running the business, it is still at the end of the day a business. It's a sharp difference, but it's also a nuanced difference. And that is what we talked about early on, is that in the for-profit world, you're really trying to, you can really definitely identify, and everything you're doing is to drive the product successfully into the marketplace. And in the nonprofit world, that balancing the fact that you have to deliver and have a need and a mission to deliver services that at the end of the day are all just cost centers. And so, and how you have to balance that part of the business with the part of the business that helps fund that, right? And so you really have to think about that whole picture a lot differently. And it's hard to, for anybody who's never sat in the chair, it's really hard to understand that, until you've been in the association world, that there's that balance that has to be, that you have to kind of grasp and get your arms around. And I think my first iteration through the nonprofit and the association world, that was a big part of the battle. And I took over, the other association in 2006, and in 2008, the financial world came to a crumbling halt because of the mortgage. I was basically 18 months into my stint running that organization when we had turned everything around from a business perspective, got it back to, not consuming the balance sheet, but actually putting assets back on the balance sheet.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden 2008 happened, and you're struck with all that good work you just did. You're going to just destroy it in your mind, because you're going to have to run a bunch of programs for the membership to help them, because you're looking at a quarter of your membership out of work.
Yeah. Right.
At minimum, by the way.
Yeah.
that was the number we got with people openly telling us they were looking.
Right.
I estimate there was another 15 to 20% that was out of work that weren't telling us they were out of work. And realizing we now had to offer a lot of programming. We had to step up programming that had no chance whatsoever of generating any near-term revenue.
Right.
But what was really satisfying is, if we looked at the membership level, like kind of take a date that was before the collapse happened.
Right.
And when I left in the middle of 2010 to go back in the industry, our membership level was actually up.
Right.
I think that only happened because during that the hardest 12-month period of time, we went out to the members who we knew were unemployed and said, look, if you're unemployed, we're waiving your membership dues for the year.
Right.
We want to help you get back employed. Would you, if you were running a for-profit, have ever gone to clients and saying, hey, this product that you pay, $350 a year to have access to, we're going to give it to you for free for the next year, but just because your business is struggling.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's it's good values,
and if you do that with
but
a
it's
quarter
also
of your
good
client
business.
base,
Right.
what does that do to your revenue and in your profitability? It wipes it out.
Yeah.
But when we look 2 years later, we actually grew our membership during that 4-year window, and in particular from the period just before the collapse to the end. Right. And that was really hard to go through, and not knowing, not having experienced that in the membership world or having been exposed to it. That was the one piece, if I look back, understanding that sooner.
Right. Understanding
we adapted to it reasonably quickly, but I think we could have adapted to it 6 months sooner if I had, been much more aware of that going in.
Right. Yeah. And talk about timely advice, huh? Many associations find themselves in that exact same situation right now. And I'm pleased to say that I've heard from many association leaders that this has been their realization as well, that in this time where the association is struggling for revenue because events have been canceled, sponsorships have been lost, et cetera, kind of the knee-jerk reaction is try to recoup as much revenue as possible. But in many cases, the members are hurting, and the members need to be attended to, and their needs need to be met. Yeah. And then if that's done well, that will kind of come back to you. Karma is practical, right? That'll come back to you in the future once a recovery has taken place and the industry is in a better place. So that's talk about timely advice.
And that, I think, when I look back, is had I had that experience or known that more fully when I first started in the association world, that I could have reacted quicker. We reacted quick enough, but I just look at it as a big learning experience that it was good to go through, but boy, it was painful at the time.
Well, it's a great story, and I'm sure it served you in this time, and it's again very, very timely, relevant story and advice and takeaway for what's happening right now. Alvin, this has been so much fun. I've loved this conversation, and there was at least half a dozen things that you mentioned that I wanted to go down the trail of, but maybe we'll have to do that at some point in the future.
We can investigate some of these things, at another time, but happy to do it.
That'll be great. Thank you so much, Alvin, for joining, and thanks for everybody for listening, and tune in on the next one. The Association Marketing Show is brought to you by Feathr, the all-in-one digital marketing toolkit built just for associations. Today, more than 800 associations use Feathr to power the digital marketing for all of their key programs, like virtual events, membership campaigns, continuing education, and more. To learn more about our technology and do-it-for-you implementation services, check us out at feathr.co. That's feathr.co. And if you've got feedback about the show or would like to join as a guest, shoot us an email at podcast@feathr.co. See you on the next one.